1814 is an important year for the War of 1812, primarily because of what's going on in Europe, particularly when it comes to Napoleon. Napoleon abdicates, he resigns from the French throne, and he goes and lives in a temporary exile, and that allows the British to basically have a surge, is what we would call it. They're going to send two armies against the United States to try to finish the War of 1812. One army is going to be aimed against Washington D.C. in Baltimore. So the British army is going to the British military is going to sail up the Chesapeake and land in Washington D.C. The problem is that in August of 1814, the British basically easily move into Washington D.C. In fact, they march up, and the Americans are powerless to stop them. The British start burning Washington D.C., particularly in reaction and revenge against American actions whenever they were actually venturing into Canada. But nonetheless, one good example is the fact that they reached the White House, or we should say at this time the Executive Mansion, and you can feel, when you hear about the story, you can feel the angst that the first family is feeling. For example, they were supposed to have a banquet in the White House, but now they are basically trying to save the treasures of the White House. Particularly, Dolly Madison's famously trying to unleash a portrait of George Washington. It would have been a major war prize of the British, or it would have been burned if the British had gotten into its hands. But nonetheless, the British show up at the Executive Mansion, and they march in, and they notice there's a massive food being spread on a table. And so what do? They sit around, and they're going to eat it. It's to be a tragedy for it to go to waste, right? So they sit down, they toast the health of the president. They even find his hat and mockingly wear it. They toast mockingly again to the health of the president, and then of course basically break up the place Charlie Sheen style and set the White House on fire. Now, it doesn't burn down to rubble, but the inside is certainly gutted. And after they try to rebuild the White House, they're trying to deal with the smoke damage, and smoke damage is hard to get rid of. So what is one way to do it? Well, how about paint the building white? And that's exactly how they do it. And so now we have the White House. But nonetheless, the same army is going to start marching against Baltimore. And it's going to be basically a joint operations. The British Navy and the British Army are going to take out the city of Baltimore. And the British Navy were going to come in, and they were going to soften up the place, particularly fire against Fort McHenry. And we have heard of the bombardment of Fort McHenry countless times. It's known as the Star-Spangled Banner. And basically what happens is that we have the commander of the fort goes to the ladies of Baltimore and asks them to sew as large a flag as possible, American flag, and they do so. And he rings it up to the flagpole, and he keeps it up there. He does not take it down during the night. And during the battle, it's up there, and the only way you knew the flag was still waving is because the cannon fire and the rockets would illuminate this flag. Well, watching this is going to be a young lawyer named Francis Scott Key, and he's going to have a poetic moment, and he's going to write what will eventually become the national anthem, and in which he basically asks us, do we still see that flag that is waving above Fort McHenry? That flag that was exposed every time a bomb blew up during the nighttime. Do you see it the next morning? And the answer, of course, is yes. The fort remains in American hands. The British do not take it, and in fact, the Americans are actually able to defeat the same army that burned Washington D.C. The Americans are able to defeat that same army outside of the outskirts of Baltimore. So things look like they're about the same thing to turn around. But nonetheless, the British are getting tired of war. You have to remember, the British have been at this war business for a long time, particularly when it comes to the effects of the French Revolution. And they're tired of war. So they're going to send peace negotiators to Ghent, Belgium, in order to negotiate a settlement. And that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to sit down and they're going to negotiate a settlement to the war. And then basically the Treaty of Ghent, really the only thing you need to remember about it is that it's signed in Ghent, Belgium, and it changes nothing. It basically just says, you know what, let's just stop fighting one another. for the most part. But of course, one thing that they don't tell the Americans is that there is a second army going against the United States, and then that army is aimed towards New Orleans. But of course, the United States is going to get wind of it, and in fact, the most notable person that gets wind of it is Andrew Jackson. Jackson takes his ragtag army and sails it down the Mississippi to New Orleans to stop this British invasion. You have to remember that Jackson is a notorious British hater. He sports a scar on his face that he got during the American Revolution from a British cavalryman with a saber cut on his face. But nonetheless, he marches down the Mississippi River and enters New Orleans. And Jackson is one of those guys who has a personality that he says, "You're going to do this. You're going to do it." If he tells you shoot your mother, you're going to ask him where's the gun. He just has that magnetic personality. Not to mention the fact that if you don't do what he wants you to do, he's going to shoot you. He has no moral compunction against that. But nonetheless, so he goes into New Orleans and he starts recruiting for his army. He goes into the bars and finds people there and says, "You will be in my army." And with these stern, cold blue eyes, he gets, the people go, "Okay, no problem." What does he next go? He goes to the jail, and he springs out of the jail the pirates that are in there, and he says, "You're in my army too." And in fact, he turns to their jailers, the sailors that are manning the jail, and says, "Guess what? I know you guys just you put them in jail yesterday. Guess what? You're in my army too." So he gets this ragtag army and marches outside of New Orleans and easily defeats the British. Excuse me. The Battle of New Orleans, first of all, is fought after the Treaty of Ghent is signed, but nobody knew that fighting the war, and the Treaty of Ghent actually has a provision for that particular possibility. But nonetheless, the Battle of New Orleans gives us Americans the feeling that we won the war. We won the last major battle of the war. Well, if we base victors of wars on who wins the last battle, then the South should have won the Civil War, for example. The last battle of the Civil War was a Southern victory, not a Northern. But nonetheless, Jackson is going to take this victory and he's going to propel himself into great heights politically. He'll use this as a national platform to say, "I am the hero of New Orleans," and he takes it all the way literally to the White House. But more importantly, the Battle of New Orleans gives us a sense of victory in the War of 1812. It was more or less a tie. But nonetheless, after 2 terms, Madison is going to retire from politics. His party, the Democratic Republicans, nominate James Monroe, and the Federalists, they limp in to this election, and they nominate their last candidate, Rufus King. Since you've never heard of Rufus King in your life before this, you can tell who won. James Monroe. Monroe easily wins the election. If you want to know the votes, 183 to 34. And Monroe is going to basically preside over a period that we know as the Era of Good Feelings, which will be on our next video.